Okay, so our next lesson is Plato's Allegory of the Cave. First, before we can get into the allegory of the cave itself, we need to examine what an allegory is. So what is an allegory? Simple enough question. What is an allegory? Well, for a story to be an allegory, it must be appreciated on two levels. Remember what we said a few videos ago. An allegory is an extended symbol. So a symbol is an extended representation of something, and an allegory is an extended symbol. Well, an allegory must be appreciated first on the surface level, which is the story itself. The work itself has to be something that can be read and appreciated, or engaged in and appreciated, something that really gets you to think and not just, here's a story. Okay. It needs to be something that you can really sink your teeth into. The second level is the abstract level, the symbol itself, the underlying meaning. What is the story trying to tell us? An allegory uses symbols that work together to develop this kind of deeper meaning. So an allegory is that extended metaphor, it is that extended symbol. Oftentimes they're intended to teach something. So teach a moral, teach a lesson, make a comment. Okay. Teach us something about society, teach us something about ourselves. Writers use allegory to add different layers of meaning to their work. It makes their stories and their characters more multidimensional, okay, and they stand for something larger in meaning than what they literally stand for. A good example of this is The Wizard of Oz. I use it as an example because most people know the story of The Wizard of Oz. You know Dorothy, you know the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, the Cowardly Lion, the Wicked Witch of the West, Glinda the Good Witch. Like, you know the characters, you know the story. That is an allegory, okay? It was, you think about the time it was written, right? It was written right around the turn of the, right around the turn of the 20th century, so right around the early 1900s. What was going on in the world? Well, we had an industrial revolution. So you have the farmers, the scarecrows, somehow having to compete with and get along with this new industry, or the tin men, right, the tin woodsmen, along with all these exotic things that are now coming into the world, like the Cowardly Lion, are all fighting for the attention of the American dream, that slice of the American pie. Doesn't get more Americana than Dorothy Gale. So The Wizard of Oz is an allegory. All of these things, the characters, the symbols, everything stands for different layers and stands for something larger in meaning than what it literally stands for. The Tin Woodsman, yes, he's a Tin Woodsman, but he's also a stand-in for the industrial workers. Allegories allow writers to put their moral and political views at the forefront of their work. Animal Farm, George Orwell. Most people read that in high school. That's an allegory, okay? And it was a way for Orwell to put his political views forward without coming right out and saying what his political views were, and therefore saving himself from, persecution. Allegories do pop up more often than we realize, okay? If you can understand how allegory works, you can see that allegory, especially when it's allegory found in satire like The Wizard of Oz, is one of the most commonly used and effective means of at least sparking discussion for social change. Okay? Maybe not necessarily making that change, making that happen, but at least sparking the discussion. Okay? Without The Wizard of Oz, how would we, it would have been a lot more difficult on a national level to kind of understand how the agricultural workers and the industrial workers and these outside exotic forces are all supposed to work together. right? Because it makes it more widely known to a wider audience, and therefore it's a means of possibly making some kind of social change. So that's just a brief refresher on what an allegory is. Here's Plato, okay? Now you'll notice the dates are all janky and that there's different ones. Plato liked to mess around with people, so oftentimes when he was on trial or speaking before, politicians or whatnot, and they would ask him his age, he would usually lie to them. And obviously, the ancient Greeks didn't keep very good records of things like that back then. So it's kind of up in the air. We know he died around 348, 347 BCE, and it's one of these 4 years is when he was born. So Plato is not his name, okay? His name is Aristocles. Plato was a nickname given to him, and it translates to broad. So Plato himself, the man, physically was, especially for an ancient Greek, was a large man. Okay, he was tall, he was wide-shouldered, broad-shouldered, very strong. And his teacher, whom we'll get to in a minute, named him Plato because he was broad. Not only is he physically broad, though, but he's also broad of the mind. Okay, he was a very open-minded individual, so he was a very broad thinker. So it's a twofold reason. He was an Athenian philosopher. If you know anything about the ancient Greeks, you know that Athens was the place to be, especially if you're a philosopher at this time. Founder of the Academy. The Academy was one of the first institutions of higher learning in the Western world. So the fact that you're in a college course right now, you have Plato to thank for that, because he founded the Academy. It was the first institution of higher learning in the Western world. He was open-minded, so he wanted his, the people teaching at the Academy to also be open-minded. So again, it's probably considered, you can consider it the first liberal arts college. He was a student of Socrates, who is probably the most famous Greek philosopher. He was also the teacher of Aristotle. Plato was. So you have the three big names when it comes to Greek philosophy: Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, all learning from each other, all being taught by one another. And then Aristotle was actually the teacher of Alexander the Great, one of the greatest military commanders of the ancient world. So you have that direct line there, which is cool. Believe it or not, Plato is a 3-time Olympic wrestling champion. Now, I'm not talking about like suplexes and splashes off the top rope and chair shots and things like that. Like legitimate, what we would consider amateur wrestling, Greco-Roman wrestling. He was reportedly undefeated. And remember, the Olympic Games go all the way back to this time. And he would have been an undefeated champion wrestler 3 times. He really was an Olympic champion wrestler. I cannot stress that enough. People don't tend to believe that, but I actually have the proof that Plato really was an Olympic champion wrestler. I'm going to show it to you right now. It's an actual photo taken with his 3 Olympic championship. Okay, it's photoshopped. But we're going to move on. So that's Plato. So Plato already has himself established as physically imposing as well as mentally imposing, being able to speak eloquently and eloquently get his points across. So the Allegory of the Cave is from Book 7 of the Republic, which was published in 375 BCE. Now, the Republic is a dialogue. It is written as a dialogue. It's written as a dialogue between Socrates and his brother Glaucon. And it's the whole book itself, the Republic itself, is describing what it would be like to live in a perfect society. What would you need to do in order for a society to be considered perfect? It's one of the first utopian novels written. It deals heavily with the idea of reality versus perception. Okay? What is real versus what is not.
Ponder this, my friends. If you were born inside of a box with the thought of a world outside it, a world that is more real, ever enter your mind? Considered one of philosophy's greatest writers, Plato asked just this sort of question in his famous Allegory of the Cave. Imagine a group of people born into a cave, chained by their legs and necks facing the back wall. The only thing they can see are shadows cast by a fire behind them, and since they've never seen the actual objects, they think the shadows are real. But what would happen if one of the prisoners were to be set free? When he turns round and sees the objects, will he know that the shadows are a less...
Deals with the ignorance of humanity trapped in the conventional ethics of society. What does that mean? Well, that means, how long do you let somebody believe something that's not true? Ignorance is bliss up to a certain point. There are, for example, certain things that we tell our children that I'm not going to get into detail with, because some of you have already said you have children and that you're stay-at-home parents, and that I don't want to ruin things for your children. But there are certain things that we tell our children when they're children, and at some point we end up having to either tell them or confirm their suspicions about the truthfulness of that situation. So it kind of asks that question of how long, and how do you approach something like that? This allegory, this story, if you will, is telling us not to take things at face value. The prisoners in the cave see the shadow on the wall, and to them that is whatever the object is. That's so if it's in this picture here, it appears to be some kind of a ram. That's a ram to them. They don't know that there's anything behind them. They're taking it at face value. Never take things at face value. The story is meant to make us ponder what is really real as opposed to what we think is real. What do we perceive to be real? Remember, it's all about reality and perception. Okay? If this concept sounds familiar, it's because I guarantee you've seen it before in one of two places, possibly. One of these two films. The Matrix or Inception. These stories are heavily influenced by the Allegory of the Cave and this idea of reality versus perception. There's actually, on the module for this lesson, you will see that there is a couple of videos there dealing with the Matrix and the Allegory of the Cave, because the Allegory of the Cave is one of the texts that the Wachowskis used when they were writing the script for The Matrix. It's one of the texts that they used and heavily throughout. It's Simulacrum and Simulation, The Allegory of the Cave, Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey, and there's a couple of others, but those are the three big ones. Alice in Wonderland is actually one of the texts that they used as well, that it's interwoven into the story. And I used to just be able to deal with this story and just talk about the Matrix. But suddenly I hit a crossroads where now I'm at a group of students that don't know what the Matrix is, but they know what Inception is, because Inception is a newer film. And Inception deals with the same idea, the same what is real, what is reality, how do we perceive it. Do you know how hard it was to find a GIF of that thing spinning? Think about the nature of reality, okay? There are multiple layers to reality, and that's what the Allegory of the Cave is trying to tell us. That we have the faded facsimile being the shadow. You have the actual object, and then somewhere in there, somewhere way out into the cosmos, is another layer to reality, the actual layer of reality. Viewing a new reality is seen as being damaged. The prisoner that is able to get out ponders when he goes back what will become of him, and he ultimately reaches the conclusion that if he goes back and tells his fellow prisoners about what he saw, they're going to kill him. If they were able to, they would revolt. Plato's telling us we are the prisoners. You're the prisoner. I am the prisoner. Okay, we are taught what certain things are and expected to just accept that what we're being told this thing is. Our mistake is thinking that material objects are the most real. Where we fall into play, where we are still the prisoners, is yes, we've gotten out of the cave, but remember that video you just watched. There is still that other layer that is saying, no, even the real object in front of you, the material object in front of you, isn't the most real. The physical world is actually still a shadow of that higher truth. Whatever your higher truth is. Your higher truth could be God, it could be aliens, it could be, Channing Tate, it could be Ryan Reynolds, whoever, whatever. Right now, we're going to do an experiment. This is a thought experiment. This is a philosophical experiment. I want you all to picture a teddy bear. Just picture a teddy bear in your mind. Take 30 seconds or so and picture a teddy bear. If you need more time, you can always pause this video. But picture a teddy bear in your head. Picture its eyes, its fur. What does its face look like? I'm guessing most people would have pictured something similar to this guy. It tends to be the case. Most people don't think of something like this guy. Now, I do have to admit, I skew this, because this is a philosophical experiment meant for children. When you tell a small child to think of a bear, a regular bear, you don't say the word teddy, you say bear. They think of the guy on the left, not on the right. Usually when you tell an adult to think of a bear, it's usually 50-50. Sometimes it's 60-40 in favor of the actual bear. I say teddy bear to skew you more towards, so that I can put you into the mindset of a child a little bit. On the left is a child's perception of what a bear is. Based on what? Most of the time, based on what they know. Okay? A child that has never seen a real bear, but has a teddy bear at home, will only associate what a teddy bear looks like with what a bear looks like. Their reality and their perception are two different things. The reality of the situation is bears are huge and can kill you. They're not soft and cuddly. I mean, I would still give that guy a big old hug because I love bears. But they're not these soft little cuddly things with smiles sewn into their faces. Okay, they are creatures that can kill you if they really wanted to. So it's this idea of perception versus reality, and at what point does a child learn the difference between a teddy bear, their perception of a teddy bear, and the reality of a teddy bear? And in order to fully appreciate and understand the allegory of the cave, you kind of do have to put yourself into the mindset of a child. There are certain beliefs, once accepted as fact, that have now been proven as false. That plays into this idea of reality and perception. I'm going to go through them quickly. There is not to be debate, because this first one is a very hot topic. We're going to go through it because it is scientifically accepted as fact. Okay, that was once just a fact that people believed that has been scientifically proven otherwise, regardless of where you stand on conspiracy theories. People once believed in the shape of the earth. They once believed it was flat. It has been scientifically proven to not be flat. Now, if you believe that if you still believe the earth is flat, that is perfectly fine. That is your belief. You're wrong, but it's your... No, I'm just kidding. It's your belief. People once believed the Earth was the center of the universe. We now know it's not even the center of the solar system. There are some people that believe themselves to be the center of the universe. My brother, for example. Heroin, tobacco, and lobotomies were often seen as being good for people and were medicinal. Okay? Women on their period were often given heroin as a means to, quote unquote, calm their lady parts. Ice pick lobotomies were done every other day in mental institutions, where they just took an ice pick and a hammer and right into the front of the person's skull. Mental illness was often seen as demonic possession, and there's an example of this that we're going to talk about. Annalise Michel. There was a film made about her several years ago. The Exorcism of Emily Rose is based on her. She was a young girl that had different mental illnesses, and you can draw a line actually through her symptoms and what they considered to be demonic possession to several physical and mental ailments that they just didn't want to believe in because mental illness had such a stigma around it, even more so than it does today. And I mean, this had to have been, like 100 years ago, right? No, it was the 1970s. So it was not all that long ago. Before I play this, before we watch this, this is her on the left. Before her exorcisms. On the right is her afterwards.
Anna Elizabeth Michel, born 21st of September 1952, was a German woman who underwent a botched Catholic exorcism that resulted in her death. Her death has also been the inspiration for the horror films The Exorcist and the 2005 film The Exorcism of Emily Rose. Born as Anna Elizabeth Michel in the 21st of September 1952 in Liebelfang, Bavaria, West Germany, to a Roman Catholic family, Michel was brought up along with 3 other sisters by her parents, Joseph and Anna. She was very religious and went to Mass twice a week, and when she was 16, she suffered a severe convulsion and was diagnosed with temporal lobe epilepsy. In 1973, Michel graduated and joined the University of Würzburg. Her classmates later described her as withdrawn and very religious. In June 1970, Michel suffered a 3rd seizure at the psychiatric hospital where she'd been staying. She was prescribed anticonvulsive drugs for the first time, including phenytoin, which didn't alleviate the problem. She began seeing devil faces at various times of the day, and by 1973, she suffered from depression and began hallucinating while praying, and she complained about hearing voices telling her that she was damned and would rot in hell. Michelle's treatment in the psychiatric hospital didn't improve her health, and her depression worsened. Long-term treatment didn't help either, and she grew increasingly frustrated with medical intervention and taking pharmaceutical drugs for 5 years. Also, Michelle became intolerant of Christian sacred places and objects, such as the crucifix. Exorcism in Christianity is the practice of casting out demons from a person they are believed to have been possessed. The person performing the exorcism, known as the exorcist, is often a member of the Christian church. The exorcist often invokes God, Jesus, or several different angels and archangels to intervene with the exorcism. Christian exorcists most commonly believe that the authority given to them by the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, known as the Trinity, is the source of their ability to cast out demons. In general, people considered to be possessed are not regarded as evil in themselves, nor wholly responsible for their actions, because possession is considered to be an unwilling manipulation by a demon resulting in harm to self or others. Therefore, practitioners regard exorcism as more of a cure than a punishment. In Catholic dogma, exorcism is sacramental but not sacrament. Unlike baptism or confession, and unlike a sacrament, exorcism's integrity and efficacy doesn't depend on a rigid use of unchanging formula or an ordered sequence of prescribed actions. Its efficacy depends on 2 elements: authorization from a valid illicit church authorities and the faith of the exorcist. After her treatment, Michelle would go to San Domenico, Italy with a family friend who regularly organized Christian pilgrimages. Her escort concluded that she was suffering from demonic possession because she was unable to walk past a crucifix and refused to drink the water of a Christian holy spring. Both she and her family, as well as her community, became convinced of her possession and consulted several priests asking for an exorcism. The priests declined and recommended a continuation of her medical treatment and informed the family that exorcisms required the bishop's permission. In the Catholic Church, official approval for an exorcism is given when the person strictly meets a set of criteria. Then they are considered to be suffering from a possession and under demonic control. Intense dislike for religious objects and supernatural powers are some of the first indications. A priest named Ernest Alt met the family and on seeing Anna declared that she didn't look like an epileptic and that he did not see her having seizures. Alt believed that she was suffering from demonic possession and urged the local bishop to allow an exorcism. In a letter to Alt in 1975, Michelle wrote, "I am nothing. Everything about me is vanity. What should I do? Have I to improve? You pray for me?" And also once told him, "I want to suffer for other people, but this is so cruel." The priest Ernest Alt had an assistant named Dorenz who performed the first session of exorcism on Michelle on September 24th. After this session, Michelle began talking increasingly about dying to atone for the wayward youth of the day and apostate priests of the modern church, and she refused to eat towards the end. At this point, her parents stopped consulting doctors on her request and relied solely on the exorcism rites. There were a total of 67 exorcism sessions, 1 or 2 each week, lasting up to 4 hours. They were performed over about 10 months from 1975 to 1976. On July 1st, 1976, Michelle died in her home. The autopsy report stated that the cause was malnutrition and dehydration due to being in a semi-starvation state for almost a year while the rites of the exorcism were performed. She weighed 68 pounds, suffering from broken knees due to continuous genuflections, and she was unable to move without assistance and was reported to have contracted pneumonia. After an investigation, the state prosecutor maintained that Michelle's death could have been prevented even 1 week before she died. In 1976, the state charged Michelle's parents and the priests Ernest Alt and Arnold Renz with negligent homicide. During the case, Michelle's body was exhumed, and the tapes of the exorcisms were played to the court. Her parents were defended by Heinrich Schmidt-Lenchner, a lawyer sponsored by the church. The state recommended that no involved parties be jailed. Instead, the recommended sentence for the priest was a fine, while the prosecution concluded that the parents should be exempt from punishment, as they'd suffered enough. This event has been retold in popular culture, via the cinema and literature, so much so that people have forgotten what these stories base their plots off of, and people have come to accept that exorcism and the ritual rites that follow are only to be found in fiction.
And we're not going to listen to that, but just some things to point out is, again, this is the 1970s, so it isn't that terribly long ago, and they believed that apparently epileptics have a certain look. The changes in personality can be explained by either TBI or traumatic brain injury or brain lesions. You know, there are things. Depression can alter your mood, can alter your personality. She didn't want to eat. Oh, she's possessed. No, maybe she's just depressed. She's not possessed. She's depressed. But it's the perception that we don't want to acknowledge that there may be some kind of mental illness. So let's project it and make it a demonic possession, because we can fix that. Okay. So one last exercise in this idea of reality versus perception. The example here is no cat has 2 tails. Every cat has one more tail than no cat. Therefore, every cat has 3 tails. Now, our educated minds and our perceptions and our experience would tell us that this is the falsest statement, because not every cat has 3 tails. But you're not reading it. If your first response is, well, no, because no cats have 3 tails, you're not reading the problem. Meet no cat. No cat has two tails. You've already met every cat. It's about perception. How do we perceive this? When we're reading it the first time, we're perceiving it as as the problem stating that there are no cats. There's an absence of cats with two tails, and an abundance of cats that have one more tail than an absence of cats, which would be every cat having one tail. But this is saying every cat has three tails, because we're not looking at it the way that we're supposed to. We're supposed to look at it not as a negative, an absence of tails, but as an entity into itself. So our perception in this case, I think this is just like the prisoners in the cave, right? We are taking at face value the words no cat and every cat, and not looking for the deeper meaning. If you looked closely when this image first came up, you can see that this cat here has three tails. So a keen-eyed observer would be able to say, oh, maybe every cat is his name. They're types of cats. No cat and every cat. There is no video for the optional reading of